This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
In one of the most closely watched primaries of the 2014 election season, the Speaker of the North Carolina House, Thom Tillis, has won the Republican U.S. Senate nomination. He will now face Democratic Senator Kay Hagan in November in a race that could decide which party controls the Senate. The Republican primary drew national attention as it pitted Tillis, who was backed by much of the Republican establishment, against candidates with close ties to the Tea Party and the religious right. Some analysts describe the primary as a proxy war in the battle for the soul of the Republican Party. Tillis had received endorsements from big-name Republicans, including Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, and Karl Rove, as well as the National Rifle Association. One of his challengers, Tea Party favorite Greg Brannon, was backed by Senator Rand Paul, while another challenger, Mark Harris, a Baptist minister, drew support from Mike Huckabee. In the end, Tillis received 45% of the vote, enough to prevent a runoff. As Speaker of the North Carolina House, Tillis was a frequent target of the Moral Monday protests over the past 2 years.
Primaries were also held Tuesday in North Carolina to determine who'll sit on the state's Supreme Court. The races have gained national attention because millions of dollars from outside groups have poured into the state to back conservative candidates. North Carolina is one of 22 states where judges on higher courts are elected rather than appointed. Talk more about North Carolina. We're joined by Chris Crom in Raleigh. He is Executive Director of the Institute for Southern Studies. Let's go first to the Thom Tillis race. Talk about the significance of what happened there. It is being seen as a bellwether for the Republican Party all over the country, Chris.
Well, North Carolina is a bellwether state, and this race, I think, just drove that home. Two of the big storylines for me are, one, this escalating arms race of big money that's increasingly deciding, including primary elections. We saw about $2 million coming in from outside groups that really wanted to back Thom Tillis as the establishment candidate for this Republican primary in an effort to topple Kay Hagan, the sitting Democrat, and eventually, like you said, win control of the U.S. Senate. So Tillis was aiming for this 40% number. That's how much he had to get to avoid a runoff. But it also pointed to another big storyline, which is this civil war that Republicans are facing with the Tea Party. And going into this race, it wasn't at all clear that Tillis, even with this establishment backing, really could pull it off. And in the end, he did. He got 45%. But it does raise the question, if those kind of right-wing challengers had coalesced around one candidate, maybe we would be seeing a costly runoff. But just because Tillis is the establishment candidate, of course, doesn't mean that he's a moderate candidate. He's also called himself the leader of the conservative revolution in North Carolina, which is why he was a target of the Moral Monday protests. And he's on record. You've talked a lot in this show about climate change. Well, in a recent debate, he was asked flatly if he believed in the science of climate change, if that was a fact, and he said no. But that's an example of, I think, how the overall debate has shifted to the right. He doesn't agree in a minimum wage. He thinks that's an artificial standard that's being put on business. He promoted the anti-gay marriage amendment in North Carolina, kind of a series of positions that really puts him in the rightward camp. So even though he had a Tea Party challenge, it shows how much the political debate has shifted to the right in North Carolina.
Could you talk about, Chris, you mentioned the amount of outside money in this primary election race. Could you talk about who some of his backers, Thom Tillis's backers, were in this election?
Well, you saw two big players coming into the primary. One, nationally, was Americans for Prosperity. They have spent more money. This is the Koch brothers Tea Party group. They have spent more money attacking Kay Hagan than any other candidate across the country. And that started last fall. I mean, they've just been blanketing, a carpet bombing of the state of these attack ads, kind of trying to soften up support for Kay Hagan. Then on the other side, you saw millions of dollars worth of ads supporting Tillis to really make sure he could survive this primary challenge from the Tea Party right. And again, there's about 1.6 million that came from Karl Rove's group, American Crossroads. Last year, they had set up this initiative called the Conservative Victory Fund. The whole idea being that they try to get the most electable candidates to face off in these general elections. So they wanted to make sure very early that you got somebody like Tillis, who's considered the more establishment candidate, who is going to survive the primary and come out in the end. And that outside money, I think in the end, you saw how close that vote was in the primary. I think you can really say that outside money played a big role.